This is The Guardian.
Hello, I'm Faye Carruthers and welcome to The Guardian Women's Football Weekly. The sun may have been out, but it was a slightly murky start to the Lionesses Nations League campaign after they were held to a 1-1 draw by Portugal. Spain were tested by Belgium but came from behind in dramatic fashion. Their stoppage time win means they top the group. There were defeats for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, but the Republic have started off their campaign with a win. We'll round up the results, discuss the fallout from the Luis Rubiales trial, plus we'll take your questions, and that's today's Guardian Women's Football Weekly. What a panel we have today. Suzy, Wrack, hello, happy Tuesday. Always my favourite day of the week when I see you.
I mean, it's nice you say it, but we know it's not true.
It's so true. Oh my God, as if I'd say it and not mean it. Genuinely. Jamie Spangher, we have you 2 weeks in a row. Look at this, back-to-back pods. I love it. How are you?
I'm very good, Faye. Glad to be back. It's been a rough weekend watching the Matildas, though, so hopefully speaking about some other teams might brighten my day a little bit more.
I know, I'm so sorry. I feel like we jinxed you again.
Yep.
We've just got this horrible habit of doing it on this pod. Sophie Downey, on the move again, wearing a hat, in a car. I mean, it's always like, where's Soph? You need to replace the Where's Wally books, I think, but with different hats than the stripy ones.
Yeah, guess where I am today. Just back from Portugal with Suzy. So feeling a bit refreshed, a little bit, but ready to go for another busy week.
I wasn't suggesting you were a Wally, by the way, Soph, but with that at all. I just thought you could just start to have your own books.
I am a bit of a Wally anyway, so it's fine. Don't worry.
You are not. I would never, ever describe you as a Wally. Right, the Lionesses kicked off their Nations League campaign with a trip to the Algarve, where they faced Portugal in Portimao on Friday night. In a tough group, it wasn't quite the start that Sarina Wiegman had been hoping for. It finished Portugal 1, England 1. Alessia Russo opened the scoring in a strong first half showing for the Lionesses, but Portugal regrouped after the break and found their equaliser through substitute Kika Nazareth. I mean, it felt like a really frustrating game of two halves, Suzy, for England. What did you make of their performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up. Like, very much a game of two halves, extremely frustrating. Second half, I think it's the quality of the first half performance that makes it so frustrating. In the England were completely dominant. I thought Lucy Bronze was excellent. The play in the middle going through Grace Clinton, absolutely phenomenal. She was just everywhere. Defensively brilliant, made a fantastic block early on that was really important. And then is sort of kind of feeding all play through her, which is super exciting when we're sort of light in that area. And we've obviously got, Georgia Stanway injured and things. But then, the second half, complete and utter sort of different story. Obviously Lucy goes off at half time. Sarina said afterwards it was a precaution, but it was just very, very lacklustre in the second half comparatively. And I think that's partly because Portugal were just so good. They just changed formation, they really adapted. They were tactically on it, switched to a 4-4-2, and the manager afterwards said he thought that was where it was super effective, and you can't argue with it. It made a difference, and England struggled to cope with it.
Yeah, Jess Carter came on when Lucy Bronze came off at half time, but as Suzy alluded to, Soph, England really struggled, didn't they, to adapt to the changes that Portugal made. It created them loads of problems, and again we see Sarina Wiegman then waiting until the 84th minute to switch things up going forward, with Chloe Kelly and Aggie Beaver-Jones coming on. I mean, she has been criticised before for not reacting sooner. Were you surprised that she waited that long?
I was, because you could see the way that the second half was going. And to be fair to England, they weren't actually, while Portugal had a lot of the ball, they weren't pummeling the goal. I think they actually had one shot on target, and that was the goal throughout the game. So they defensively were quite good, England, especially given that's been the complaints in recent times. But I do think you could see the way that the game was heading, and it just called for maybe a bit of adaptability. I sometimes think when you think about the goal for England and the way that they scored it, that's England at their best, direct, switching the play really quickly. And when you look at the goals that they scored against, I think Germany last year, their best, when they're at their best, it's in that free-flowing attacking mode, and I just don't think they do it enough. I think Portugal, you could have they were trying to play through Portugal way too much, rather than thinking about when they have the ball playing centre backs of Millie Bright and Leah Williamson, who can switch the passes. Like, I was watching it, and Portugal move as a pack across the field, so there was so much space on either flank when they were on the opposite flank, and it just required looking up and thinking beyond the game plan of just trying to play through the lines. So I think it's adaptability in terms of Serena Wiegmann and kind of, her changes, and when they make, I do think she is hampered by the kind of squad that she has at the moment and the injuries, but I also think it's also the players needing to learn in those moments that you can play slightly differently, or you just need to take the initiative a little bit more. I do think, I'm not overly worried. I've been talking to Suzy a lot about how zen I am about the whole situation, so I don't think it's like a signal that we're going to crash out of the Euros or whatever. There are improvements to be made. This is the time of year to make those improvements, and the next test is going to be even bigger.
Yeah, it certainly is. 4 months away, the Euros, aren't they? Look, there are big absentees, Jamie, for the Lionesses, as we know. Lauren Hemp, Fran Kirby, Alex Greenwood, Georgia Stanway and Beth Mead now as well. It did mean that Jess Park and Grace Clinton were given starting roles. Suzy was impressed by Clinton, but how did you think that they both did?
Yeah, honestly, I think that this is, Serena used those friendlies before Christmas to really experiment with the youth and bring in players like, Ruby Mace and Laura Blinker-Brown and start to integrate them in the team. So Grace Clinton, like she's had her opportunities, but I think she really needed an opportunity to be the starter over Georgia Stanway, because Manchester United manager like Mark Skinner has spoken about the fact that she can play in the 8 and it's a place that he might prefer her to be. So I think for her to be able to come in and play in Georgia Stanway's position, and like Suzy said, the Lionesses played the football through Grace Clinton. She was phenomenal, and she's always been a player, especially at Spurs last season, that plays far more mature than her age. She's a very, very good ball user, and she just wants the ball. She demands possession. So I think that for her to be able to come into Georgia Stanway's position and play that well, it was very, very impressive. I think I felt bad for Jess Park. I didn't think she had a bad performance, but she's played out of position. Again, bringing it back to Grace Clinton, we've seen her play on the wing a lot for Tottenham and come in and invert into the midfield. We haven't really seen Jess Park play that role. So I don't see that being a long-term plan for Serena, because Lauren Hemp is probably the most important player in this Lionesses squad. And when she comes back, she's a starter. So the midfield was an interesting setup. I also thought teams have begun to realise that if you mark out Keira Walsh, England really struggle, and I think Portugal tacked onto that in the second half. So Grace Clinton is a very mature player because she's able to demand possession. She doesn't hide from it, and it really fills gaps for England.
We've been saying that for the last few years now, haven't we, with Keira Walsh. It is just 2 wins in the last 5 for England, Suzy. Those games against Germany, South Africa, the USA, Switzerland and now Portugal. Soph says she's zen. Are you as zen as Soph? Because, it is just 4 months. We kick things off at the beginning of July. Are you panicking at all, or is Sophie rubbing off on you and you're also in your yoga pose?
I'm 3/4 of the way to Sophie zen, in that there's been a big change, right? In the type of games that the team are playing, from when you look back at the last Euros to and the run into that to this Euros and the run into this. Obviously, the introduction of the Nations League has changed things quite dramatically. We've not got, this kind of time last year. We had the Arnold Clark Cup. It was friendlies. Draws with Canada, draw with Spain. That was off the back of a 20-0 against Latvia, a 10-0 against Latvia, a 1-0 against Austria. We're talking about very different competition. In the April camp, it was North Macedonia 10-0, Northern Ireland 5-0. It's a completely different ball game now. And so I'm less worried about draws and defeats to top nations in and around this period, and that's what we're looking at. The loss to Germany, a tight 4-3 loss, a slightly insane game, a bit of an anomaly. 0-0 draw with the US, nothing to be sniffed at. They were fresh off the back of a Olympic gold, riding high, and then you're talking about a 1-1 draw with Portugal, who have never ever been an easy team for England. I was looking back at the last 2 games before this fixture. The last one was either a 0-0 or 1-1 draw, I can't remember which, and then the one prior to that was the 1-0 win in Portugal under Phil Neville towards the end of his tenure. That was a really bad performance, and that was the key. It wasn't even really that England had got a win in that game. The performance was so poor that the questions were being asked. At least we saw a really, really good first half performance in this game that shows signs of what England can do. So I'm not like worried. The one concern I do have is, as much as I don't really care about the Nations League, it is a competitive tournament and no other big nation seems to be necessarily having the same sort of problem that England has time and time again. I mean, some are having a little bit of a dip in this Nations League, but I mean, like, England, every single gap in between a major tournament seems to have a little bit of a like wobble. There's a little bit of a hangover and things like that, and I don't see many teams having that same problem, and that's the only thing that slightly concerns me. But again, like, who the hell am I to doubt Serena, who's won 2 European Championships, taken 2 teams to World Cup finals? Like, the verdict will be done by the time of the Euros and them being over, and we'll be able to say, well, you know, they got it right or they got it wrong. But even then, even if England get it wrong at the Euros, like, I don't know, in Serena we trust. Like, I don't see anyone better that we would have in this position. Like, I just think it's football, everyone's getting better. Like, we're not going to win everything. That's just the way it's going to be. And that's why we like it, right? Like, it's boring when Chelsea win everything, isn't it? Like, it's not as fun. We want there to be a bit of drama. And, yeah, we're not going to win everything.
It was a fast, successful trajectory as well. So, obviously, it's going to plateau at some point and have a couple of dips along the way. I think it's when you see other teams like Portugal, for example. So, they're 22nd in the world. I think the Portugal that we're seeing now is vastly different to the one that we've seen in the Arnold Clark Cup previously. They've built really well under Francisco Neto. They were actually unbeaten in 2024, which is quite incredible. And they were always going to be a tougher opponent than maybe we thought on paper.
Absolutely. I was actually telling everyone I could speak to last week, this is not going to be easy. Like, I think some people thought we'd go into that test and just walk over them. It was never going to be easy on their home patch with the kind of forwards that they have as well. I know Kika came on, but even in terms of like the Silvers, Jessica and Diana, they really, really stretch the play. They have so much pace in them, and the way they have become defensively solid as well. Like, Portugal love having possession of the football, but they've actually in the last few years really developed that defensive structure around the ball. And they've been in 3 of the last 4 major tournaments, I think. And, they came into the last Euros. They didn't get out of the group stage, but they performed so well given that they had something like 4 months to prepare because they were kind of parachuted in at the last minute. So I think we've really seen that development. I think the other thing I'd say, like, maybe to Suzy's point about England as well, is that I think everyone thinks about that unbeaten run that England went on, and I think that's actually a rod for England's own back in a way. It was brilliant at the time, don't get me wrong. Everyone loved it who was an England fan. But I think everyone is thinking back to that time and then thinking they should just like run over everyone. And it's not going to happen in this day and age with the Nations League. I have my own views on the Nations League in terms of what I think of it as a competition. But there is no doubt that they were playing like top quality opposition every time we step out onto a football field. And if you want that side of the game to continue, you want that competition to continue, then the 33-game winning run is never going to happen ever again.
We're going to have to do a singular pod on Sophie's rant about the Nations League. I actually quite like the Nations League. I prefer competitive games. I get why you don't like it. It's probably going to take way too long for us to cover on this pod. And Sophie might lose her zen-like state if we start, so let's leave it for now. I want to know about Kika Nazareth, though, Jamie, because there was a little bit of surprise that she was left on the bench and perhaps now explained that she's had to leave the camp, but she really changed the game, didn't she, when she came on? What did she add to this Portuguese side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was surprise, and then obviously now we've seen her withdraw from the camp, so that's explaining she's picked up something. But a player like her, obviously we know that she plays for Barcelona. She's a really, really strong, exciting forward. But for her, it felt like when the game, Suzy spoke a little bit about Portugal changing formation in that second half and really kind of adapting to the game state. But it felt like when you've got someone like her that can act as a target, but also like open up the play and split open the play. It felt like Portugal had a lot more control of the ball because they were able to carry possession and kind of drag England where they wanted to because they knew they had a target like her. And then we've seen it, like she wheels onto her like right foot and she puts that top bins, and that's to no one's fault. I think there's a little bit of a minute there where Millie Bright backs off, where she probably should put some more pressure on her. But I think when you've got a player like that can pull that out and, you know, put that top shelf, it's a player that Portugal need, because I think their standard is actually so consistent across the pitch. But when you've got a star like her that can come on, it really, really lifts levels, because they're not a pushover team. Like everyone has said, they are not a pushover team. But I think every nation, when you're coming up against, you know, teams like England, you're coming up against teams like Spain, you do need an outlier that's going to kind of like get you over the line in those results. So yeah, she's an exceptional player. I can wax lyrical about her all day long, but yeah, it's about finding those stars, and I think England maybe underestimated that because she wasn't on the pitch at the start of the game and they weren't ready for that transition, and I think Portugal outmanaged that second half, and she obviously had a big part to play in that.
Well, learning curve then in that case. Do not underestimate when you've got a player of that quality on the bench. And actually, it's going to get even tougher for England because they host Spain at Wembley on Wednesday night, and Spain themselves were involved in a dramatic 5-goal encounter. They hosted Belgium on Friday. Belgium actually went 2-0 up before Montse Tome's side. They launched a comeback. They needed 2 injury time goals though to salvage all 3 points. Didn't go quite their way, but you know the best tend to find a way, don't they? I don't want to fully analyse Spain's game. Let's look at them in terms of an opposition, Suzy, ahead of Wednesday's match. Are you expecting any changes from England's point of view?
I don't expect a huge number of changes because I think once Sarina Wiegman sort of hits the run into a tournament football, she likes to start finding the starting 11 that is going to be her starting 11 for a tournament. You know, we've seen her with most of her teams sticking with the same starting 11 throughout an entire major tournament. So I feel like she'll be edging towards that starting 11. But I think there will be tweaks. I mean, obviously the injured players mean that there sort of has to be. But whether there's many from the Portugal game, I think it will probably be minimal. I hope Lucy Bronze is back because I feel like we really need the attacking threat out wide. Her and Neve Charles are so much more forward thinking than say a Jess Carter like filling in at right back. I think we could maybe see a Nikita Paris or a Chloe Kelly instead of Jess Park for a little bit of a more natural wide player. But I think other than that, the only other change we might see is maybe in goal, purely swapping Earps for Hannah Hampton for Hannah Hampton's distribution. But that said, I always feel whilst Hannah has the better distribution, I always feel more confident if Mary is in goal for big games. I don't think Hannah Hampton quite has the confidence in those big moments. You know, if she has a bit of a wobble, then I think it gets in her head a little bit. So I think there's a little bit of a decision to be made there about what you sort of sacrifice in that scenario. But I think having Hampton, who has played against Spain before in the Arnold Clark Cup, sort of match ready and sort of confident would be a good thing going into Euro. So I think like minimal changes, and we're going to start in the next couple of months, the next few months, to see the closest thing we're going to see to the starting 11 for the Euros, a bar maybe, you know, if Lauren Hemp can be back, her slotting probably straight back in.
We all know the last time these two sides met, so feels like forever ago, doesn't it? And yeah, sad times. 2023 World Cup final, in case anybody listening can't remember. Look, different teams, a lot has gone on since then. What will England have learned maybe from that day, and perhaps what they need to try and be successful in the game on Wednesday?
I think what they will have learned from the World Cup final is that they need to be much more savvy against a Spanish team, I would think. And it was about the goal in the World Cup final came from a big error in midfield from Lucy Bronze, I think. And I think it's just about really being aware that, you know, you cannot make those kind of errors against this kind of opposition and get away with it. I think for England, and I think it's the same across all of the board, whether it's men's, women's, youth level on either side, when they play Spain, they need to get comfortable without the ball. And I think you have to just accept that you can't play Spain at their own game. They're going to play possession football. They want to do that ticky-tacky, you know, pass it around multiple times, try and pass their way into the box, all of that kind of stuff. And I think England fall too often sometimes into the trap of trying to match that rather than trying to nullify it. And, some of the best defensive people don't like non-possession football, but actually some of the best defensive performances are those where you really understand that you're not going to have the ball for a while. If you look at Belgium against Spain on Friday, they had 18% possession and they got 2-0 up until the 75th minute. So that shows what can be done against this team. This team can be got at. They are fallible at the back if you get at them right and if you're prepared to play directly, but you can't try and match them at their own game. And I think that's the trap that England have to avoid trying to fall into on Wednesday night.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're world champions, obviously, Jamie, current Nations League holders as well. But I think probably, and maybe because of so much going on behind the scenes off the field, that they've maybe had some more ups and downs than you'd expect from a team with silverware. Why do you think that is? And just like as Sophie alluded to, where can they be got at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as someone that's not English, I'm looking at the English media and the fans and the coverage, and it feels like as soon as England falter, there is a lot to be analysed and there's a lot of pressure on Sarina Wiegman and the Lionesses and what they can do. But if you look at Spain over the last 12 months, they have not been exceptional. And this is a team that we hold to the highest honour, and we think, oh, they beat everyone. It's really like they're an invincible force and no one can beat them. But if you look at their last results, like the 3-2 win over Belgium and then a 4-2 win over France, like Sophie said, they are very gettable defensively. They're leaky at the back because when they lose possession, they're kind of not used to that game state. And then they smash South Korea, but then they've got 2 back-to-back draws in October to Italy and Canada. So this is a team that I think if England were getting those results, a lot of people would be calling home about it a bit more. So I think for a team like Spain, we know what they've got going forward. Their firepower going forward off the bench and in the starting 11 is ridiculous, because I think that you can start anyone in that squad up front. Like, you don't have to have your regular starters in the midfield or up front. Defensively, they're a little bit more shaky. I think right now they started with Leila Wahabi and Laia Alexandri on Friday night against Belgium, and we've seen them be shaky at Man City, and now that's kind of transpiring into the Spain team. So I think if a team is able to sit back and just be a little bit more humble and not need to, grab at possession, like Sophie said, there are holes because they're not very savvy on the counter-attack when a team kind of grab the ball off them. So I don't think this is an invincible team going into the Euros. And again, echoing what Suzy and Sophie both said about England, I don't think England fans need to be too worried, because if you're saying Spain are going into this tournament as major obvious winners, I don't think that's true. I think every team's gettable, and if Sarina kind of sorts herself out, tomorrow's going to be a big test of whether both nations are in their levels.
It's going to be fascinating, isn't it? I can't wait. A proper battle. That's it for part 1. In part 2, we'll look at the rest of the international action, while there was big news in Spain with the conclusion of the Luis Rubiales court case. Welcome back to part 2 of the Guardian Women's Football Weekly. The rest of Europe were also involved in Nations League action on Friday night. In League A, Wales and Scotland looked to test themselves against top-tier opposition. Wales fell to a 1-0 defeat in their opener against Italy in Monza, thanks to a 5th-minute header from Barbara Bonansea. Hayley Ladd, meanwhile, became Wales's latest player to reach 100 caps. What will Rhiannon Wilkinson have made of her side's performance, Suzy?
Well, she said afterwards that she was very proud, and the fact that it was a 1-0 defeat and that she was annoyed with that was a testament to the team and the way they had played, which I think was fair. Generally speaking, I think teams of Wales level need to sort of have a little bit more confidence in themselves when they go up against teams who are technically above them, but there's not that big a gap at that level between some of the teams, and I think they've got such quality in the squad and have done so well in qualifying for the Euros that there's a big chance for them to cause some upsets in their group, and this was a sort of testament to that. So I think she's right to feel frustrated at the 1-0 defeat. It's narrow. I think there's a good opportunity for Wales to cause some problems and get some really good experience in ahead of the Euros as well. It's a tough group, so it's going to be really interesting to see sort of what happens in the next game.
Well, that's tonight. If you're downloading the podcast on Tuesday afternoon, you've just got a few hours for this preview, so we're not going to specifically preview the game, if you like, but we will talk about both sides in terms of, particularly Wales, in terms of the Euros. The game was doing the rounds on social media, wasn't it? And not necessarily for the action on the pitch. Soph, the Swedes come into this off the back of a 2-1 victory over Denmark, and it was the Pernilla Harder versus Magdalena Eriksson derby, wasn't it? What would you give to be a fly on the wall in that household?
It's very, very funny. I think it just shows it testament to kind of the competitors that they are. But I did feel a bit sorry for Pernilla, who came off a little bit worse in the sort of struggles between them. I think she had a bruised rib and a bruised nose to go with it. But they both joked separately, I think, in post-match press conferences that it's one to tell the kids about when they're older. But yeah, no, a great story. I think it's for them as well. It's a really interesting one. It's a bit like the Man City Chelsea thing that we've got about to come over the horizon here. They play each other twice in the Nations League and twice and they face each other as well in the of course in the Euro group as well. So they're going to be seeing a lot of each other. So this was just one of the preparations.
Yeah, brilliant. So Wales host Sweden in Wrexham later. What threats are Peter Gerhardsen's side going to pose to Wales, Jamie?
Yeah, honestly, I think we know the attacking threat of Sweden, don't we? We know how good they are and how stacked they are up front. I think for Wales, it's obviously it's about being defensively sound, and we've seen how headstrong they have been over the last couple months. You know, Ireland do pose a threat, and they held them off quite well. And now it's kind of fighting a different beast in Sweden because of their talent up front. But I think, honestly, with Wales right now, going into the Euros, they're a young side. They're a very promising side. I think it's very promising that they've got Elise Hughes back in the setup. I know she didn't play on Friday night, but that's a young striker who we know when we can see at her best, she can really be making an impact for Wales. So I think you're going in against a team with a top opposition, but a team like Sweden over the last couple of years, they have had a bit of a habit to underperform at major tournaments. So I think that it's going to be a real test for Wales to see what their level is at, because against a team like Sweden, they do like to play their best football outside of major tournaments. And then they finished third at the World Cup, but there were some shaky showings along the way. So I think for Wales, it's about entering this fixture defensively sound, focusing on that. You're not going to probably win the possession battle. You really just need to hold up against who Sweden can bring off on the bench.
And Wales have the Netherlands in their Euro 2025 group, and the Netherlands face Scotland tonight. Scotland were beaten 1-0 by Austria thanks to a goal from Essen midfielder Lily Puschella. It was quite a poor performance actually from Scotland, wasn't it? They were up against it for much of the first half. Should their fans start to be getting a bit worried at the moment, Suzy?
No, in that they've only got an interim head coach in at the moment in Michael McArdle. So it's not like a change isn't afoot. He made 10 changes to the starting lineup that suffered that really awful defeat that meant that they didn't get to the Euros against Finland, wasn't it? So there were changes, but the performance was not great. I mean, it was pretty flat. They had chances and missed them. I mean, Kirsty Hansen said afterwards that that she was really annoyed with herself for not taking the 2 chances that she had. So there's worry in that, obviously the performance wasn't great, but at the same time it's sort of they're in a little bit of a literally an interim phase with an interim manager, but a little bit of a middling phase. And once they get a permanent person in post, then hopefully that things can start turning around a little bit faster. And I hope that they spend the time. It's good they've got an interim in, finding someone and carefully doing their due diligence to get someone who's really going to fit and work for their team, because their squad is so stacked with talent. All of that said, we can't, be too dismissive of Austria. They're an incredibly well-organised team. They've had great sort of tournament runs at the Euros. England only got a 1-0 win over them in the opening game. It was a late win. It was a really tough, gritty win. So, a 1-0 loss to Austria isn't an embarrassment. So I think frustration at the performance around that, and given that they had a decent-ish amount of the ball at 40-ish% and 10 shots, 6 on target, more shots on target than Austria had. So those can be the frustrations, and the way they play can be the frustrations. But I wouldn't say a 1-0 loss to Austria is anything to be kicking yourself too hard about. And I also think that there's not a need to sound alarm bells when there's change afoot, right? It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, they just need a little bit of stability at the moment, and then build under a new manager. So Netherlands at Hampton Park next. They come into this off the back of a 2-2 draw with Germany. I'm sure Wales will dissect this game afterwards. They're playing at the same time, pretty much. What are going to be the main threats, Soph, do you think, that the Netherlands pose?
I mean, they've got so many, especially in the attacking area. I mean, Viv Miedema's back. She captained the team against Germany, and she's just looking like the player she's always been, back to her best again. And then Lineth Berenstein as well, I think, is going to be a major threat. She scored twice against Germany. She's in some form for her country at the moment. I think she's really stepped up in the last few months, or even the last year, to become that kind of forward that they've always expected her to be. So I think across the park they're going to have problems. I think the Netherlands are in a different league to Austria in terms of what they can do up front. So they're going to really have to up their performance, Scotland, if they are going to be able to hold them in distance. I think, because when you look at the Netherlands at the moment, I think they're quietly going about their business. People don't talk about them so much as maybe the Spains or the Englands of the world. But I have them up there as a real, one of the ones to watch at the Euros this summer. So they're going to be tricky.
Yeah, they are. Poland were tricky for Northern Ireland because in League B, teams obviously looking for promotion ahead of 2027 World Cup qualification, and Tanya Oxtoby's Northern Ireland fell to a 2-0 defeat away in Poland. Poland, of course, preparing for their first ever major tournament. What positives, Jamie, if any, can they take from this result, do you think?
Yeah, this game was definitely a hard one because Poland obviously dominated the possession, but the quality of that Polish team to be in League B is quite odd, I feel. Obviously, they've qualified for the Euros and it is their first tournament, but they have some real talent. Obviously, Iwer Power, and they've got some real firehouses up there. And for Northern Ireland, I think the biggest issue was they didn't register a shot on target. And this is a team that we know that have struggled a lot over the last 6 months in terms of instigating those attacking threats. And I think although Poland are a good side, they're not to be underestimated. They're not a side that's going to show up and really, really shut you out at the back. Like Northern Ireland had their opportunities. They had 5 shots, but none were on target. So I think Tanya Oxtoby is looking at this side right now and she's trying to find, the players that are going to make the difference. I think having Simone McGill back and fit is big for them because going forward, she can be a real threat because of her pace. But yeah, it was a hard fixture because I think Poland, 18 shots they had on goal. Like they really, really exploited Northern Ireland at the back. And I think it's just about organisation because if you're going to perform against these teams in Europe, it's about organisation at the back. And I think Northern Ireland, Tanya Oxtoby's a great manager and she just needs a little bit more time, I think, to kind of organise this team and figure out what their philosophy is because it does feel like they're having struggles in more than one area of the pitch right now.
Yeah, I agree. Bosnia and Herzegovina at home is who Northern Ireland have next. Finally, Carla Ward kicked off her tenure as manager of the Republic of Ireland with an edgy 1-0 victory over Turkey. Faye Carruthers scored the only goal of the game deep into first half injury time. It was a real tricky night for Ireland. Not the prettiest of performances, I would say, but conditions were not great and there was perhaps a little bit of a hangover from their disappointment, similar to Scotland's, of not qualifying for the Euros, Soph.
Yeah, indeed. I think if anyone's been to Tallaght, they will know what that pitch can be like. It's a complete wind tunnel. Even with the new stand, when the wind blows, it's just impossible. So when you put the ball into the air, it just goes very, very wayward. So a bit of a kind of a really tricky conditions for Ireland. I think they're trying to, under Carla Ward, they're starting to try and implement a new style of football. They want to possess the ball more. I think it's hard when she was only in camp for 2 days before the game as well. It's just going to need a little bit of patience, a little bit of time while these players adjust. Had some injuries as well. I think Turkey as well are an underrated, tricky opposition, and they came and made a really good test of it. So for Carla Ward, the most important thing was getting those 3 points. That first win as a manager can hang over you for a while if you don't get it. So she can now put it to rest. She's got those 3 points, and I think going to Slovenia, she'll see that as a real opportunity to really start to make her mark in terms of the kind of style of football that she wants Ireland to be playing.
Patience in football. So if you're asking way too much, for goodness sake, patience in life, in fact. Yeah, trip to Slovenia for Carla Ward and the Republic of Ireland later on tonight. And as I said, not really much point us previewing tonight's games. By the time the pod comes out, it will be very out of date very, very quickly. So let's look at the SheBelieves Cup. Jamie is cringing inside about this next part. There've been the kind of customary February international tournaments around the world. world, and the USA have continued their good run of form at the SheBelieves Cup with a 2-0 win over Colombia and a 2-1 victory over Australia. Emma Hayes made 11 changes to her starting 11 for that second match, and she stated that squad rotation is a key focus for her. She says the objective for this camp for us was to deepen the playing pool by giving opportunities to less experienced players in high-pressured situations. I think we've achieved that by playing everybody in our squad in these first 2 games. I mean, that is fair enough, isn't it? Makes perfect sense because they don't actually have anything to play for until the 2027 World Cup, which they're obviously still going to need to qualify for regardless. But how much of a boost is this period for both her and her team going into the World Cup, Suzy?
I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you compare it to sort of the way things have changed for England with the Nations League introduction, in that, like, I think the US need more competitive fixtures and more high-level competitive fixtures between major tournaments because, they don't have the Euros. It's good in a sense that they've got that time to sort of, and Emma Hayes has got that time to experiment with players and sort of blood, young talent, and kind of give them that, like, top-level experience in meaningless games is, like, a really, really helpful thing. But I think there's a balance to be struck. For example, Serena Wiegman with England could do with more of that time, which has almost completely gone bar, 1 or 2 games. There's got to be somewhere in the middle for, I think, both. And, that's the constant issue you're grappling with, is when, they're such a dominant force in their confederation, like, the level that they're competing against locally is, in the CONCACAF qualifying for the World Cup and that kind of stuff is not strong enough really to give them a decent test between major tournaments. So it's good. It definitely helps, but I do think they could do with more competitive fixtures as much as England could do with slightly fewer.
Yes. Again, just like patience, really. Fixture organisation in football. Another massive question mark. Question marks over Australia at the minute, Jamie, as well. 2 straight defeats. How worried are you about their current form? I don't think you're as zen as Soph, that's for sure. And it feels like it's taken forever as well to appoint a permanent replacement for Tony Gustafsson.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Faye. Like, when you think about it, it feels like, Tony Gustafsson departed Australia a couple months ago. No, it was last summer. Like, it's been 8 months with Tom Sermanni in charge as the interim head coach right now. And I think what the game against Japan, the first game of the SheBelieves Cup, really displayed was this is an interim period with no future, because it felt like Tom Sermanni was playing as an interim head coach that was just, he's there to fill in, because you're playing Mackenzie Arnold, who's out of season. The NWSL ended months ago. You're playing a centre-back partnership of Alana Kennedy and Claire Hunt, which historically hasn't thrived. So it did feel like it was, put on the players because of their reputation, not what we're going to build on forward. And that was why I did take a lot of positives from the USA game, can I be honest, because I think we saw a manager that was looking at the future a little bit more. Tegan Micah, I think, deserves that number 1 shirt, and she should have it for the future. She's a young goalkeeper with a higher ceiling than Mackenzie Arnold has right now. She's probably past her prime. And then he's played a player like Winona Heatley, who I thought was probably the brightest spark. And you've got that young spine now, players like Kyra Cooney-Cross, Mary Fowler, and Holly McNamara. So I felt like the USA game was, okay, let's now look at who's going to come up. Because what Australia have had over the last 10 years is they've had a core group of good players, like really standout players. You got your Sam Kerrs, your Steph Catleys, your Caitlin Fords, your Mackenzie Arnold's, Katrina Gorries. That core group is now on its way out. So the positive I took from that USA game was, okay, we're looking at the future now, and there is something to be seen here. There is something to be seen. It may not be that golden generation that's passing through now, but there might be a bit of a future plan. But again, you take it with a grain of salt, because never in a million years is Emma Hayes, putting out that starting 11 in a major tournament or a big game with stakes. And I think it does, prove a bit of a testament of where the USA are at in terms of youth level. Because if you can bring on a player like Jaden Shaw, Emma Sears, the Thompsons, like, the level of youth talent in that USA squad is so inspiring. So yeah, I took it with a pinch of salt, but I did see a large improvement in that USA game, and I'm just hoping maybe we might have a head coach soon.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's got to be some planning, hasn't there?
Yeah.
Going on behind the scenes, and there's question marks over whether that is happening or not. So the final is on Thursday morning. It's USA against Japan, and actually Japan, as they always are, Soph, have been really fun to watch. How do you see that one going?
I just love watching Japan. They're so good. I think it's going to be really interesting. Obviously, the last time they met, I think, was in the quarterfinals of the Olympics. The USA won 1-0. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two sides in the different cycles they're in right now are going to match up against each other. I mean, Japan this tournament have just been really, really good entertainment. You've got kind of, I would suggest that anyone would go and watch the Momoko Tanikawa's goal from the weekend, because she's 19, but absolutely phenomenal strike. And then you've got someone like Mina Tanaka, who's scored 4 goals in 2 games. So when Japan are on it, they're really on it. And when I keep thinking about this, and I think it's more for them, it's about consistency now, because they've obviously got the talent within their team. They've got a really good collective feeling within the team, but they just need that consistency. And when I think back to the World Cup in 2023, they beat Spain 4-0. They came out and beat the world champions 4-0 in that tournament, but then they couldn't back it up the next game. Or the game after, they got knocked out of the tournament. So for them, it's about building that consistency of results to mean that when they have a really good performance like that game against Spain, where they completely outdid them, they can then go and back it up with the next one and the next one. And that's how they can truly get to challenging for trophies at the end of the day.
Yeah. Right, massive news this week. Out of Spain, Thursday afternoon, it was announced that Luis Rubiales, who you'll remember is the former president of the Spanish Football Federation, had been found guilty of sexually assaulting Jenni Hermoso at the 2023 World Cup final. He's been ordered to pay £10,800 in fines and isn't allowed to go within 200 metres of Hermoso or contact her for 12 months. He was acquitted, though, of coercion, as were Jorge Vilda, Albert Luck and Ruben Rivera, who had been on trial for putting pressure on Hermoso to say that the kiss was consensual. This is what Jenni Hermoso had to say afterwards. After all, this will create an important precedent in a social environment in which much remains to be done. My heart is full of each of the people who have been, are and will continue with me in this fight, and now it's over. Both Rubiales and Hermoso are planning to appeal. Separate to this case, Rubiales' appeal against FIFA's 3-year ban from football was rejected by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. What are your thoughts on all the verdicts here, Suzy?
I mean, there's great positives, right? It's great that he was convicted of sexual assault. It's great that his ban hasn't been overturned. I wrote in a comment piece afterwards that the whole thing leaves a bitter aftertaste, because I don't understand how he couldn't have been done for coercion, which is something Irina Paredes said in her press conference before at the start of this international window. And the fact that it's been a non-custodial sentence as well is very frustrating. I mean, we're talking about a fine that is less than 1.5% of his annual salary before obviously he was forced to step aside. So it's like pocket change for him. So the impact on him is fairly minimal. His 3-year ban is all only, I think it's up in 2026. So it's not that far off being done. He's got a pocket change fine, and he's going to be able to rebuild his life of some kind and potentially come back into football in not too distant future, if anyone will take him. But based on sort of the way the Football Federation operates, it would not surprise me if we see him back in football in some form, or in another country. You look at Jorge Vilda working in Morocco. People seem to fall on their feet pretty nicely. When they clearly kind of been hugely problematic for female players in women's football. So it's good that he was found guilty, because I did worry for that at some points. It sends a really, really strong statement, I think, to across women's football, but across Spanish society generally, about what is and isn't acceptable, what consent is, those kind of things, what is appropriate in a workplace and what isn't. But I think it doesn't go far enough, and I think that's the frustrating thing. Is it's a small victory amid not defeats but frustrations around the rest of it. I mean, I hope we see further change for players in Spain and stuff. I mean, the fact that Montse Tomé, his assistant, is still manager baffles me. Absolutely baffles me. She testified in the court, said she didn't know that that Spain had a policy on sexual like assault in the federation and sexual misconduct and things like that. She said she didn't know, and like, just come on, man, you can't have someone like that managing a football team who has been so a part of the preceding regime. So like, there's still clearly a lot of change that needs to happen there, and like, it's sad that Hermoso has basically had to sacrifice so much in order for anyone in the Spanish national football team to be taken seriously on any of their complaints that they've had over many years against the federation.
Yeah, she's been so strong, Soph, hasn't she? Really brave, carrying a lot of that on her shoulders. But if you brush it under the carpet, then what's to come for the women coming up underneath you?
I think it's really admirable, the sense of responsibility that she's taken on her shoulders. What happened at the World Cup final was disgraceful, and she was the victim of that. But she's had to kind of not put that aside, but she's had to take on a much bigger mantle, as it were, in terms of, it's not just about the kiss, but it's about the whole kind of the court case. It was about the Spanish Federation. It was about getting rid of Rubiales. From that, it's about the whole like conversations around the setup of the Spanish team and the removal of Jorge Vilda as well. So there's been so much more to just the incident, which in itself is bad, like bad enough. And then also it just makes me so sad that it was meant to be the best moment of her career, of her life. She won a World Cup final. They're meant to be celebrating that, and it's all of this came out of that, and it just tainted that memory for them, I think. But I think she has to be so proud. I would hope she is so proud of everything that she's stuck with since the fight that she's shown, the fact that she has managed to see a bit of change in the Spanish team in terms of the changes that come through. I know it's not there yet, but it's down to her and down to a few others in that team that have managed to push that through, and that has to be something you have to be so proud of.
Yeah, Emma Hayes, Lucy Bronze and Sarina Wiegman, just a few of those who've voiced their support for Jenni Hermoso and the Spanish team over the last week. Jamie, there's been a lot of support for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important as well that the media are asking these questions of people and players and managers across football, because I think it's so important that it's spoken about outside of Spain. Like, these are players that are in the game. These are players that, someone like Lucy Bronze, like a lot of those Spanish team members, they were her Barcelona teammates at the time, and she said, I can't speak highly enough of these people because they are making change for the future. So I think it's such a hard situation, because you want to say, oh, that's really, really good, I'm really, really excited that he's been convicted, but then it's kind of like, this is a man that has done that on a World Cup final where there's cameras, it's live streamed, it's on TV. That's the best case scenario to be able to prosecute him, and he's kind of gotten away with a slap on the wrist. So it's a bit of a sad indictment, but it's really good that we can at least get the guilty verdict, and then the women's football universe is speaking about it, because it's an important issue. It's not just happening in football, it's happening on everywhere in the world. So yeah, it's a bittersweet moment for the game and just for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's lighten the mood a little bit, shall we? We had an email from Jim who messaged us on Women's Football Weekly at theguardian.com. Thank you, Jim. Is anyone else sick and tired of seeing goalkeepers faking injuries at 20 and 70 minutes so that their managers can have a team talk? It breaks up the flow of the game, which is the point to some extent, but it's so dull for anyone watching. On top of that, we're often told that players standing around for minutes on end waiting for VAR decisions isn't good for their muscles, so surely the same is true here. And as we saw with England conceding against Portugal immediately after Mary Earps went down injured, it isn't even guaranteed to stop the opposition's momentum, as it gives them the chance to have a timeout as well. Thoughts, everyone?
I'd jump in on this one. I find it equally hilarious but equally aggravating at the same time. I do think Mary Earps, particularly on Friday night, I think she forgot which leg was injured. One was in the air and the other was in the air. And it's like, I find it very amusing, the amount of dramatics that go on. And the problem is you can never say anything. So like, you can hint at the fact that they've gone down for a tactical reason, but you're going to feel very bad or have it like kind of egg on your face if they are actually injured. So you can't really call it out. I do think it's a lot more prevalent in the women's game than it is in the men's game. It does happen in the men's game, don't get me wrong, but I think for some reason it's more prevalent in the women's game, and it's been a tactic of Emma Hayes's over the years, for sure. So yeah, I don't know how you get rid of it. I don't know how you police it either, because they could genuinely be injured. So it's a really like tricky conundrum, I think. But yeah, it's a weird part of the women's game.
It's a clever manipulation of the rules, right? Because like Soph says, you can't police it really. Like it's impossible to. They could be genuinely injured. Yeah, it's a loophole, right? Like they found their little loophole.
To be fair, as a football fan, I've been annoyed before at opposition players who I've thought are doing the same thing, and then they're stretchered off and you feel so guilty afterwards. But anyway, it's been a great pod as always. Jamie, lovely to see you. I'm so sorry about Australia at the moment. Hopefully, over the next few months, you'll get a full-time coach and things will start to improve. But lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you guys. Hopefully next time we chat, we do have a manager. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Enjoy your drive, Soph. Take care. I'll see you soon. See you at Wembley.
See you at Wembley. Thank you.
Suzy, see you later, alligator.
See you later.
Oh, you're supposed to say in a while, crocodile.
I know. But, you know, it's a
teed
bit,
you
it's a
up
bit
perfectly. No, it's not naff. Oh, I say that with my little boy all the time.
That's the only time it's acceptable to say it. I say it to James when he was 5, you know?
I thought we had that kind of friendship, Suze. You've disappointed me. I'll see you later.
See you later.
Keep having your say by sending in your questions via social media or emailing us at womensfootballweekly@theguardian.com. And as ever, a reminder to sign up for our weekly women's football newsletter. All you need to do is search Moving the Goalposts. Sign up. The Guardian Women's Football Weekly is produced by Sophie Downey and Hattie Moyer. Music composition was by Laura Iredale. Our executive producer is Sal Ahmed.
This is The Guardian.